Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the South and West Plans Panel. My name is Councillor Hannah Bithell, and I'll be chairing today's meeting. Could I remind everyone that today's meeting is being live streamed on the Leeds City Council YouTube channel so that the public can observe the meeting without needing to be present. South and West Plans Panel deals with applications from the south, northwest, and west of the city. The aim of the panel is to hear all the relevant information from applicants, members of the public, and council officers to help members of the panel make their decision. Could I now invite members and officers to introduce yourselves, and please do mute your microphone once you're finished. And if we can start from my left, please.
Good afternoon, Rebecca Clay, Planning Officer for South and West.
Hello, John Booth, Principal Engineer Highways.
Good afternoon, Councillor Kilamanaka, representing Bermondsey and Richmond Hill.
Good afternoon, Councillor Taylor, representing Chapel Allerton Ward.
Afternoon, everyone. Councillor Andy Roundtree, representing Kirkstall.
Afternoon, John Garvani, Horsforth Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Bromley, Horsforth and Rawdon.
Good afternoon and Happy New Year, everyone. Councillor Paul Ray, Huntsland Riverside Ward.
Good afternoon, everybody. Daniel Lenough, part of the Plans Panel team.
Afternoon, everyone. I'm Robert Finnegan. I'm a councillor that represents the Morley North Ward.
Good afternoon, I'm Councillor Colin Campbell.
Good afternoon, Councillor Lynn Buckley, representing Old Woodley Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Trish Smith. I represent Pudsey Ward, and a very happy new year to everybody watching.
Hi everyone, Natasha Prosser, Clark to the panel.
Hi, Nikki Diol, Legal Advisor to the panel.
Good afternoon, Jonathan Carr, Head of Development Management.
Good afternoon, Steve Butler, Group Manager for South and West and Leeds Officer at South and West Plans Panel.
Lovely. Thank you very much, everyone. Moving to the agenda, could I ask the clerk to go through agenda items number 1 to 5, please?
Thanks, Chair. Agenda item 1, there's no appeals. Agenda item 2, no exempt items. Agenda item 3, no formal late items. Agenda item 4, members to declare any interest. Councillor Finnegan.
I'm a member of Morley Town Council. Morley Town Council have commented on the Western Road application.
Can I just clarify for the purpose of transparency, Councillor Finnegan, were you part of that objection or are you reserving your position so that you can determine the application?
I wasn't part of that objection, but I am a member of the Town Council that lodged an objection. Nothing to do with me, Gov.
Thanks, Chair. Agenda item 5, apologies have not been received.
Thanks, Tash. So we'll move on to agenda item number 6. And just to remind people, for councillors' protection, our addresses are no longer public. So if we can remember not to mention the specific councillor's name, please. And I'll hand over to Rebecca to present. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The application under consideration is a householder's planning application for a proposed first floor side and rear extension to an established semi-detached residential property. This application is presented before the panel in a personal capacity, submitted either by a member, director, or officer performing development management duties. This slide shows the site location, denoted by the red line. It's a rectangular plot of land which has an incline from north to south as well as west to east. The site is not within a conservation area, nor is it listed, and the surrounding streetscape is residential in character. This is the property's frontage. It is set back from the highway with a driveway to the front and a single-storey side and rear extension, which is currently in place and was subject to a previous approval. You can see from this image that the neighbouring property across the east boundary is set at a lower ground level than the host site. This image shows the current distance in place to the boundary with the neighbour to the east, and this distance is to be retained. It also shows the existing boundary treatment in place between properties. This photograph shows the rear elevation of the property and the current single-storey extension. The proposed first floor would sit directly above this extension. This image is taken from the neighbouring property to the east, and it shows the relationship in terms of level changes between properties. This slide shows the adjoining neighbour, and as you can see, there's no extensions on the adjoining neighbour's property. And this final image shows the neighbouring property to the east, who have constructed a single-storey rear extension, and their driveway abuts the host site. This slide shows the existing floor plans with the current single-storey side and rear wraparound extension. And this slide shows the existing elevations of the property and distances in place to boundaries, which again would be retained. This slide shows the proposed floor plan to the first floor side and rear extension. It is well set back from the property's frontage and has a modest projection beyond the rear elevation. It retains good distances to all boundaries and there is no risk of terracing. The extension is proposed to accommodate 2 additional bedrooms, and windows are located within the front and rear elevations, affording views out over the host's own garden areas. Here we have the proposed front and rear elevations alongside some 3D modelling. The proposed first floor is a modest proportionate addition, affording a hipped roof form which moves the massing away from boundaries and is well set down from the roof, allowing it to read as a subservient addition. All materials match those existing, and the development is not considered to harm the character of the property or the streetscape. And this final image shows the side elevations of the proposed extension. It highlights a considerable setback of the first floor from the frontage and its modest projection beyond the rear elevation. All windows are again appropriately positioned to prevent harmful overlooking, and the form and distances in place to boundaries are considered acceptable in preventing harmful overshadowing or overdominance to neighbouring properties. No representations have been submitted with regards to the proposal, and the recommendation to panel is that the application is compliant with planning policy and that planning permission be granted. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. There's no registered speakers in relation to this item, so I'll move straight on to members' questions for officers. Councillor Rondry.
Thank you, Chair. Just after a small piece of clarification, actually, could you tell us the meaning of the word terracing as it appears in paragraph 23? I mean, I think I can guess, but I'd just like to have it set out. Thank you.
Terracing is when semi-detached properties or detached properties become almost combined, forming a terrace by removing that spatial gap between the dwellings.
That's what I thought you meant. Thanks very much for that.
Thanks, Councillor Rondry. Any other questions at all? No? Okay, in which case, any comments from members? No? In which case, would somebody like to move the motion? Councillor Ray, and a seconder, Councillor Gavani, and we'll take a vote. All those in favour? Okay, it was unanimous. So we will move on to item number 7. Okay, thank you. I'm going to ask, this is item number 7, which is the former Airedale Mills Mossbridge Works in Rodley. And I will ask Mike to present. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The application before you seeks a deed of variation to the existing Section 106 agreement. This relates to a previously approved outline application and subsequent reserve matters scheme for a residential development. The reserve matters application was approved following the plans panel resolution on the 8th of June 2023. There's just a couple of slides to jog members' memory, really. This is the red line boundary of the site. I'm sure you're familiar with that. Just accessed off Mossbridge Road in Rodley itself. Just an aerial shot of the site, centrally there, the triangular portion of land between the nature reserve and the canal, Leeds and Liverpool Canal. And just finally, an overlay of the proposed site layout, just to give members an idea of the development itself. So the variation has been brought to plans panel in accordance with the Chief Planning Officer's delegation agreements, whereby the Chair, in consultation with the Chief Planning Officer, considered the application should be referred to panel because of the significance to vary the existing Section 106. So the variation seeks to include reference within the 106 to allow either 100% affordable housing scheme or proceed with the extant approval, which would provide 15% affordable housing. The proposed deed of variation is sought by the applicants to provide additional flexibility for the delivery of additional affordable housing. So the proposed changes to the deed of variation continue to provide a minimum of 15% provision of affordable housing, and thus this is considered policy compliant by officers. Furthermore, officers have suggested the insertion of a clause which requires the developer to confirm to the local planning authority prior to commencement of the development which level of provision will be provided. So in summary, Chair, the proposed deed of variation is considered acceptable by officers, and it allows the developer increased flexibility for the delivery of additional affordable units within the city. Thank you, Chair.
Lovely, thank you. So there are no speakers' rights on this. So do members have any questions for officers? Councillor Campbell?
Just can you just repeat what you were saying about the condition in relation to was it pre-commencement condition or a pre-occupation condition in relation to the actual mix?
Yes, certainly. Yeah, we've suggested to the applicants a clause within the 106 that they will notify, obviously, the LPA prior to commencement of the intention of either proceeding with the approved scheme or obviously incorporating the additional affordable housing.
Councillor Smith?
Thanks, Chair. You know that I have great concern over the workings of this bridge, and I see daily issues relating to the bridge. And I know that this isn't relevant to this particular thing, but I think before we sort of allow them to start building, we need to ensure that this bridge does in effect work efficiently, correctly, and more importantly, safely. So I'd like to put that on record that I still have concerns about this bridge. Thank you.
Can you make that into a question, or would you like us to reserve it for comments and I'll come back to you?
So, Chair, the question was, are we confident that the bridge works safely?
We've had no recent reports of it or issues with the bridge, and the provision of the bridge just remains, in terms of officers' stance on it, that is incorporated within the extant permission. So the operational parameters of the bridge will continue as per the approval, obviously regardless of the affordable housing provision changing.
So
Very briefly, members will recall when the actual application for the wider housing site came forward, although again, the bridge issue wasn't directly material to that, as this isn't really. It was signed off by the independent engineers as being operable within the tolerances and limits that were specified. Thank you.
And Councillor Gavani?
Thank you, Chair. Can I just get straight in my mind? This is going to be either 15% or 100%. They're not going to have some sort of floating figure between there. Thanks.
That's correct. We've sought further clarity on this, obviously, given it was presented previously to plans panel, and the intention is to proceed with 15% or the 100%. So it will be policy compliant in that regard, either way.
I know you said they make the decision before they start the building. Do we know what they're going to base that decision on? Is it just a case of, if we find a registered provider who'll take it all, we'll do 100, otherwise we'll do 15? Is that it?
I believe that's the intention, yes. They're looking at obviously the two options, and then dependent on how they wish to take the scheme forward, like say if a registered provider does come on board, obviously the latter will be potentially pursued. Yeah, that's correct.
Thank you. Any further questions from members? In which case we'll move on to comments. Any comments from members? Councillor Smith?
Thank you, Chair. Sorry. This is a very, very contentious scheme still, and it remains so. And this is, I believe, one of many variations that are likely to come forward. So could we please make sure that any variations do come back to panel, please? I have some very real concerns over the safety of this application and the environmental impact on the nearby nature reserve. And I do think that we need to be very, very careful with what we're doing. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Smith. Whether it comes back here falls under my discretion, so I'm happy with that moving forward. Councillor Finnegan?
Very, very briefly, I've raised this with planners and others before, and housing at this particular point. This 40%, 60% split, it's one of those things that we really do need to look at in the future. By and large, I don't need more owner occupation in my patch, and I suspect it's the same with everybody else's. What I need is more socially rented properties at this particular point. So at this stage, we get a 40, 60% shift. It's just to say sometime in the future, we need to seriously look again at that particular split to see if we can't get more socially rented housing, because I think that's what's required, not intermediate housing, which is owner occupation by some other name. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Gavani?
Thanks. Slightly different view from Councillor Finnegan. If there's a possibility of this being 100% affordable, why wouldn't we take it? Why wouldn't we accept that, really? Yes, fully all social rented would be brilliant, but intermediate, I don't see much of a problem with that. It helps, it all helps with that housing mix and getting those affordable housing figures up.
Thank you. Any final comments at all? Okay, if there's no further comments, does somebody want to move the motion? Councillor Ray, and somebody's second? Councillor Gavani. All those in favour?
Abstention.
Against? And abstentions? 1. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, the motion for approval of the variation has been agreed with just 1 abstention. Thank you, Chair.
Just waiting for officers to switch over for the next item. Thank you. We'll now move on to item number 8, which is a field off Westerton Road in Tingley. And if I could ask Adam to present, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This was the subject of a panel site visit this morning, albeit slightly muddy in gaining access to the site. It's an agricultural parcel of land located just to the south off Westerton Road in Tingley. This is the site in question here. It's towards the centre of the site that's coloured darker in green. In terms of the surroundings, to the left, which is the west, we've got an existing or on-site housing development that's been built out by Redrow Homes. We also have existing residential developments to the north that fronts onto Westerton Road. And we've got also existing residential development to the east. Further to the south, there is a gap, but beyond that, there is further residential development, namely in the form of other parcels of land being built out by Redrow Homes. There is a local primary school approximately 500 metres to the west of the site, Westerton Primary Academy, and we've got a small convenience store, which is a Tesco's, approximately 600 metres to the east. There are bus services on Westerton Road to provide services to Leeds City Centre, Dewsbury, Wakefield and to Bradford. In terms of the current proposal, it's an outline planning application, and that's to establish the principle of residential development together with the means of access. So what members aren't considering today is the layout of the scheme, the design stroke appearance of the houses, and the scale of the houses and the landscaping. This is just to establish the principle of building residential development on this site, together with the means of vehicular access. So it's an outline application. It's for up to 9 dwellings, with the access being taken from and through the existing Red Road development, which is currently being built on site at the moment. The applicant have an arrangement with Redrow to take their access through Redrow site, and that connects and joins up with Westerton Road. The layout before you, that's purely indicative. That's how a development of up to 9 houses might theoretically be developed at some point in the future. And were outline permission to be granted ever, then an applicant would need to come forward with what's called a reserve matters submission to show the detail of the housing and the layout. It's probably important to paint a bit of a policy picture of the local area and the history, really. And clearly that is set out within your panel papers that you've read. But in order to visually aid that text that's in there, I often find it's easier to look at a plan and to point and to explain things in better detail. Yeah, I know. So the site in question is this red line there, together with that small L shape that connects with Westerton Road. So the areas that I've outlined in yellow, namely this piece of land here, which spans all the way in a southwesterly direction there, and this area of land here, those areas are already allocated for housing in the SAP. Those are identified, and indeed planning permission is being granted on a significant portion of those yellow areas for residential development. And the Redrow application that was approved by City Panel some time ago is on-site building, and that is spread across 4 development sites. So Redrow are currently building on that site there, this site, this linear site along that stretch there, and this bottom southwestern portion in here. This part of the allocation here is in separate ownership and hasn't got planning permission, but it has nevertheless been granted in terms of its SAP allocation for being principle of residential being acceptable. Prior to the SAP being adopted, all of this land was designated as open land under Saved Policy N11 from the UDP. Following the SAP allocations and the land being put forward, those SAP allocations effectively superseded the open land designation, save for areas or other areas of land that weren't considered suitable or put forward for development. So in that respect, the open tract of land, the Woodland Valley in the Hague Woodland, that was not considered suitable for residential development, so that wasn't allocated development. And the site in question here clearly that it's in separate ownership. It wasn't put forward for allocation in the SAP at that particular time. But nevertheless, it remains open land under policy N11. And it's just worth highlighting what policy N11 does, and it's on page or paragraph 28 of the report. I'll just read it out because it is a fairly brief policy. It basically says, on the following tracts of open land, only open uses will be permitted. Building will only be allowed if it can be shown that it is necessary for the operation of farming or recreational uses, and if it would not adversely affect the open character of the area. And the policy lists the number of, or the areas of land that are formed or that form part of the open land designation. And number 3 is Hague Wood in West Ardsley. So in terms of members' consideration today, officers have the view that clearly proposed residential use doesn't form into the definition of agricultural or recreation, and the development of up to 9 houses would clearly have an impact on the openness and character of the area. So in that respect, officers are clearly content that refusal is the correct recommendation. However, members have seen on site this morning for themselves, and very shortly the applicant's agent will be putting a case forward why members should disregard those comments and be supporting the proposal. Now, clearly, if members have a contrary view and think that the context has changed since the UDP policy was first adopted, and that the context has changed in terms of residential development has been developed on a number of areas around the site, and the site is less open, then if there are material planning considerations which indicate otherwise, then members are clearly entitled to reach a different view. But in terms of officer stance, the principle of residential development is considered to be unacceptable. Moving on to matters of access and highway safety, the current access currently serves 36 dwellings off Westerton Road. So the proposal would add a further 9 dwellings, resulting in a total of 45 dwellings being accessed off the road onto Westerton Road. And from a highway and pedestrian safety point of view and impact on the local network, we think that that amount of development is acceptable. All other issues to do with the design, the appearance, trees, biodiversity would be considered any future reserve matters application, because at this stage we do not know the design. It's just establishing the principle of residential development. But for the time being, officers consider the proposal to be acceptable or unacceptable due to the conflict with policy N11. And it's now up to members to obviously debate that and to question officers and then question the applicant's agents if they so wish. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We have a speaker here against the proposal. Could I invite Mr. Sadler to the table, please? And once you're ready, you'll have 4 minutes to share and put your case to the panel. Just sorting out some tech before we have these speakers. Thank you.
Magic card. Thank you, Chair. I have with me today Kate Curtis to my left, who's a Senior Director and Landscape Architect at Pegasus, and the applicant, Helen Davis of Binks Homes, to the right, and we'll be happy to help with members' questions following our comments. Regrettably, I think the recommendation before you about this
unremarkable small urban windfall site is confused, misdirected, and based on a false premise. It's confused because it uses language associated with greenbelt determinations rather than small urban windfall sites. It's misdirected because it incorrectly advises that there are no material planning considerations to weigh in the balance of judgment. It's based on a false premise because policy N11 is now OTOS as a means of protecting the formerly large open tract of urban land at Haigwood, and as a consequence of your own positive development management decisions over the past few years. I therefore urge members to defer this matter for better reflection and in order to underpin the Secretary of State's policy in the framework, which requires decision makers at every level to approve planning applications for sustainable development where possible. Helen would now like to make a few points as she rightly, in my view, feels especially aggrieved at the recommendation.
Good afternoon. I'm Helen Davis from the applicant company Binks Executive Homes. My family's lived in West Ardsley for over 100 years and we've been builders in West Ardsley for over 40. On several occasions over the past few months, officers have advised that this application would in fact be presented at panel today with a recommendation for approval. Indeed, on the 13th of October, officers confirmed actually in writing that the initial N11 policy objection had been discussed at length and in some detail, including with landscape and ecology colleagues. And the clear conclusion that was that the construction of 9 houses could be supported on this small field. This was because the formerly large tract of open land at Haig Wood, originally protected by the 2006 RUDP policy N11, has been substantially eroded through the site allocation plan provisions, resulting in the surrounding residential land being developed and built out by Redrow Homes. In support of this changed circumstance and conclusions, we were also advised that senior ecology and landscape officers would be present at panel today to confirm support for our application. So you can imagine my complete shock and horror just before the Christmas break when we were advised by telephone that this position had been reversed and refusal on non-compliance with policy N11 would now be recommended to members. We've had no substantive reasoning for the changed position, and our sensible suggestion of deferral to better understand the logic and the hidden rationale has been totally ignored. I hope members can appreciate that this field is now surrounded by existing new and future development, and there's no long distance public views to be protected. The indicative layout retains open recreational land to the south in the valley bottom, and in accordance with the landscape-based approach taken to the substantial SAP allocations on the northern and southern flanks of the valley. I am aware your next item today, also in Ardsley, but for 56 houses, is also a deviation from the development plan. I am astonished by its recommendation for approval, whilst my application for 9 dwellings has been changed to refusal at the 11th hour. In conclusion, some or all of you will have visited the site today, and I would ask you to question whether it's reasonable or indeed appropriate to dismiss the significantly changed circumstances and take such a narrow view of non-conformity with policy N11. I would urge you to defer this matter and reflect with officers. You might wish to consider the benefit of approving a small windfall site against the retention of a small field now surrounded by houses. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do members have any questions for the speakers, please? Councillor Finnegan.
Did the owner of this site own any of the site that ultimately Redrow are developing? That's question 1. Question 2, how many of the proposed houses are likely to be affordable units?
Councillor Finnegan, we meet again. No, the owner of this land did not have any part of the other parcels of land, and that's why it didn't come forward through the core strategy and SAP allocations. Sorry, what was your other question?
How many affordable units?
Well, this is a scheme for 9 houses, so it it isn't required to provide affordable housing in accordance with policy.
Any other questions from members for the speakers? Okay, in which case we'll move to member questions to officers. Councillor Ray?
From a planning perspective, if this particular parcel of land, bearing in mind what the applicant has said, had actually been purchasable by them at the time that the original permissions for the other parcels have gone in, would there have been a likelihood that actually it would have been seen as compliant in the overall scheme? I know we're obviously looking at this particular parcel of land in isolation, but in the context of the surrounding area, would that have been at that point probably seen as reasonable?
Just for clarity, councillor, are you asking if the landowner had put this site forward within the SAP for housing, would it have been accepted? That's something I'm not able to answer. That's an assessment that's taken place, I suppose, outside of a development panel venue, if you like. That's a separate forward planning process that really I don't think that it's for this panel to comment on whether a site would or would not have been allocated for development in a development plan.
I appreciate that. What I'm trying to understand is the context. The developer is saying effectively that the context of the area has changed and that actually if that land had been available at the time, potentially that would have had a consideration potentially to have been allocated for housing under the SAP. I'm not asking, I suppose it's a really difficult question because actually we're asking a what if question about what could have happened should it have been available. I'm trying to understand from a, if you will, from a planning point of view, contextually, not necessarily the legal position, but the contextual position. If that had been available at SAP, would there have been a likelihood that the council would have potentially put it forward for development in terms of its allocation? And again, I appreciate it's a very big what if question.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to intervene. I think it's very dangerous to consider potential possibility scenarios in this context. We have an allocated plan, we have an allocated site plan, and we also have a adopted core strategy. This is the policy that's being referred to, N11, is extant. It's not been revoked in any way. It forms part of our suite of development documents, and that is the position of fact.
Councillor Campbell?
Actually, Chair, I was going to say something similar as somebody who sat through all the SAP. I had a full head of hair before we started. And we did spend a considerable amount of time on this area in particular. And I have to say that this piece of land was not included within the land that was put forward for development as part of the SAP process. You can't speculate on what might have happened because this is what actually happened. And it now has a designation within the local plan. And I think what we're being asked to do here is set aside the local plan designation on the basis that in the next field houses are being built.
Any other questions from members for officers? Councillor Rountree?
Thank you, Chair. You might want to guide me on the procedure here, but I'm wondering if I could ask the officers whether they'd care to comment on the statement that the applicant has made that there was a last minute change of heart here. Is that something that we could address at this time, or should that fall later?
Yes, yeah, thank you, Chair. It's not unusual, I suppose, for officers through the consideration of any planning application to have different views from time to time. It's probably worth pointing out the initial recommendation or stance from officers upon the first few weeks of the application being submitted was actually that it was unacceptable. So we have changed our mind a couple of times, but it's not unusual for discussions to take place and to have differing views. That's part of the democratic process of planning, really. So to say that we changed our minds is true, but we also changed our minds originally. So we were not in support of the scheme as originally submitted. And then we were being persuaded by the applicant. And then after further discussions with senior officers, we concluded that the right recommendation was refusal. So in terms of the commentary there, I'm not disagreeing with what's been said.
Thank you. Any further questions from members at all? No? In which case, we'll move on to member comments. Councillor Finnegan?
I'm on record as having opposed and voted against Red Rose application at this particular point from people who were on central plans. I think ultimately will have heard the arguments and discussions at that particular point. I felt at that time it wasn't sustainable. I felt that the housing mix was wrong. My colleague was there when I argued with him about housing mix and other such things. We're in a situation where the community gets out of this. No affordable housing at this particular point. They didn't want the 299. They've got 299. That inevitably has an impact on local infrastructure, whether that's the local schools, local health centres, the local roads. People will appreciate that that's actually the case. But ultimately, what we have here is a site that isn't allocated for housing. Now, who knows what might happen in the future? There are hypotheticals that may or may not be, but based upon what we've got at this particular point, this site isn't allocated. The community would argue they've taken more than their fair share of development with the 299 houses that they battled for 4 or 5 years to try and prevent at this particular point. I think the officers have got this right at this particular point, and on that basis, unless people have other comments to make, I move the officer's recommendation, which is, I think, an all-time new for me, if I'm not mistaken. It's possibly the case I've moved it before, but I would move the recommendation on that basis, Chair.
I haven't had anyone shout out second, and I've got 2 more comments. So would anyone like to second before the comments? Let's do that.
I would like asking the difficult question. That's why I asked it. I think the legal position is very clear. We have a site allocation in place for the very specific reason of making sure we know what's going to happen on what land and when. The legal position is solid. There's no reason for us to deviate from our site allocation plan and our established policies. I've got confidence that the officers have judged this legally correctly, and I will be very happy. Something's going wrong, Robert. We seem to be agreeing on more and more planning applications. I'm very happy to second the proposal put forward from the officers.
And Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I actually third this, that the officers have got this quite right. It's 9 houses, but it's another 9. It's another 9 on top of what the community are already having to have, on them throughout the SAP. It's 9 with 4 bedrooms. It doesn't suit the housing mix. We've got another loss of openness and amenity. It's a green space that the community can still use at this stage. If we build on it, it's gone forever. I'm a big advocate for brownfield first. We should stop building on our green spaces unnecessarily. So I'm happy for this, and I think the officers have got it absolutely right.
Councillor Campbell.
Notwithstanding all the usual stuff, we have a policy, and those of you who sit with me on city plans will know that I'm consistently saying, what's the point of a policy if we don't stick to it? This is a policy. In the future, who knows what might happen? In that there has been a call for additional sites for the SAP sites for the revised local plan. Who knows what might happen then? But at the moment, as somebody, as I said, who sat through the SAP and discussed this site at some length, and I've discussed the Red Rose sites at some length, we were quite clear that the policy in relation, or what's it, policy in 11 covered this part of the site. And it seems I can't see any other reason being put forward to set aside policy N11 other than the fact that they're building a housing estate next to it, which doesn't, to me anyway, sound a good strategic reason for setting aside this policy.
Thank you, Councillor Campbell. Any final comments from members? In which case I'm comfortable taking Councillor Finnegan's proposal and Councillor Ray seconding, and we'll move to the vote. All those for the officer recommendation? Oh, yeah, I didn't vote. That was unanimous, and therefore I won't call for against and abstentions.
Yes, Chair, the application has been refused as per the officer recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We'll now move to item number 9 on the agenda, which is some land off Bradford Road in East Ardsley. And I will ask Lydia to present. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this item is for a proposed development of 56 dwellings, and it's brought to members today as the site is allocated for a new school. So this represents a departure from the development plan. And this is a full application which seeks permission for all details and follows the approval of the adjacent consent for 299 dwellings. Local ward member Councillor Foster has also made a request for the item to be reported to the Plans Panel for consideration. So on the screen, you can see from an aerial view, those of you joining the site visit today might be aware it looks a little bit different now to what it shows on screen. As you can see, the area to the north, this is now filled with as part of the 299 dwelling scheme, and the area to the south. So that's a section which is, oh, come back. That's a section which is part of this development, and that's where the 56 dwellings will be constructed. So at the moment now it feels more like an open field, which you'll see on the photographs later in the presentation. So this to the southeast in this area, that's St. Michael's Church, which is a listed building. But the application isn't considered to cause an impact to it, given its existing historic housing development to the south side and the low setting of its development. You'd still have the same the views across down Bradford Road towards that site. And to the west of the site, there's Bradford Road, which benefits from a number of bus services, which are relatively regular, and the main access into the site from Bradford Road onto St. Michael's Drive. So I don't know if you can see that there. That's the main access. So here you can see the full red line boundary of the site and part of the adjacent site to the north, which has been constructed. So I've included some photographs of the site now for those of you who couldn't join on the site visit. As you can see, it appears as an open greenfield site. You can see on the left there, those are the constructed dwelling, sorry, which is part of the Barrett site. And this shows the listed church views, and you can see it's set up on a higher land level. So here we have the site layout, and it's the landscape plan. And this shows a good mixture of parking to the side and front of dwellings, with some open front gardens, parking to the front, garages for some of the dwellings as well. And the dwellings are arranged off a single spine road with a small cul-de-sac at the midpoint and terminating in short private drives towards the eastern end. Generous gardens are shown as well, which shows some good separation between the housing development to the north and the historic housing developments to the south. pictures. And this section. Ooh. There. So the area to the front is public open space, and that's to the northwest. And there'll also be a leap to the east of the site. And all trees to be retained, with about 50 trees to be planted on the site. So this slide shows the sections. As you can see, the proposed developments will be the height similar to the existing dwellings to the south and west of the site. The development will not be overly imposing or over-dominate on the neighbouring sites. So the next few slides show some of the house types, and I haven't included all the house types within this presentation as there are multiple designs with the different variations of each type. The dwellings will be constructed from a mix of stone and brick walling with terracotta and slate tiles. So this is the 2-bedroom semi-detached Primrose property, and the design and dwelling shows good level of detail with heads and sills and front door canopies. This is a 3-bedroom detached property, and the design again shows a good level of design with heads and sills, dentils as well, and a front door canopy. This is another 3-bedroom property. The design shows good detail, and again, got heads and sills and another front canopy. And this is a 4-bedroom detached property, and this shows again good detailed design. So here we've got the detached Bernay property, and this is a 4-bedroom with an integrated garage, and the elevations show front gable, bay windows to the front and to the rear. And this is another 4-bedroom property with front and rear elevation showing heads and sills and a bay window with an entrance canopy. And there's a singular bungalow on the site. So this is the detail of the bungalow. So the next few slides are some CGIs provided by the developer for this presentation. And this is a view looking from the north to the south. So this is from the Barrett's development looking towards the proposed development. And this is another CGI showing internally in the site. You can see the detailing and the stonework as well on there. And another CGI of internally down one of the cul-de-sacs. So that shows the street trees, you've got the front canopies there, heads and sills, and you can see how well the properties are designed. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We have a speaker here against the proposal. If I can invite Councillor Foster to the table, when you're ready, you'll have 4 minutes to present your case to panel.
Thank you, Chair. First, I'd like to make clear I'm not here to convince the panel that the land in question shouldn't be developed. I've seen Leeds City Council's report on school places, and it seems compelling, and I've no basis to argue against this report. However, I'd like to point out that the council felt this location was ideally positioned for a new school, which is completely understandable, highlighting the enormous geographical importance this location has for Ardsley. This land is located where Tingley, East and West Ardsley come together. Many older people here see Ardsley as a village, and if that was the case, then this would be the village green. However,
To us more recent interlopers who moved here over the last 35 years, we see a much different community, one that failed to launch whilst thousands of new homes were constructed with no supported infrastructure or communal planning. In Ardsley, we've seen almost zero effort to provide any recognisable communal centre or space where residents can meet their neighbours as they go about their daily recreational and retail routines. For most people, this consists of getting in their cars and going elsewhere. And for those unfortunate enough not to have their own car, are left in the dystopian nightmare of failing public transport systems and petrol station retail therapy. None of this should come as a shock to the panel, who must be sick and tired of listening to me sound off at full council about how badly Ardsley and Robin Hood is treated and ignored by senior people employed and elected to serve us. This community rates poorly in the council's own map of deprivation, and yet still insists on turning a blind eye and prioritising the inner city communities that rate very good on the same deprivation map. One reason is the relentless drive to install more and more high-value executive housing, pushing our ward's social progress indicator higher and higher, creating even less opportunity to close the gap between the haves and the have-nots. Almost all housing development here fail to deliver the desirable affordable housing quotas for reasons I don't understand. Being a lower income family here is extremely difficult, and for those more fortunate find themselves living in deluxe boxes connected to the outside world via their BMWs and Mercedes. As one of our community organisers said, this is a zombie land. So what am I looking to achieve here today? As stated in my opening remarks, I'm not looking to challenge development of this land, but feel this debate presents opportunities to have all the challenges I've highlighted discussed at public level, and all options considered in principle before deciding on any change of use. Also, I understand if you know the history of the developers' dealings in this area, we have no moral reason to oblige them. Neither, due to the site allocation plan's designation of education land until 2028, do we have any legal obligation to allow this development. So I ask this panel to reject this application on the grounds that this land is designated for education use, and that any future change of use should only be done once all options of use, such as recreational, retail and commercial, as well as housing, have been fully examined over the next 4 years until the review is due in 2028. If a solution can be found that benefits both developer and community, I'm sure the panel could be persuaded to authorise change of use before this date. As I said earlier, this land has significant importance to the community, highlighted by the council's recognition that it was an ideal location for a community school. This application is requesting a very specific technical change to the Leeds development plan. I'm asking you to protect this land here today to ensure any premature change of use delivers the very best possible outcome for my community by upholding this land's official designation and refusing this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, do we have any questions for the speaker, please? No? In which case, we'll move on to speakers in support of the application. We've got Mr. Johnson here, who's the planning agent. Could I invite you to the table? And once you're ready, you'll have 4 minutes to speak.
Thank you, Chair. Just before I start the 4 minutes, I've got alongside me Mark Jones from Barrett David Wilson Homes, who may be able to answer some of the more technical questions if they're asked by members. So if I may start my 4 minutes then, Chair. First of all, we agree with the officer's report. There's a couple of tidy up points that I just want to make reference to with respect to the report, if I may. Firstly, paragraph 72 refers to it being in flood zone 2, and it's not, it's flood zone 1. That's in effect the whole of the developed land where houses will be built is flood zone 1. There's a reference under paragraph 51 to the mix, quite not making it on the 2-bed. That's actually not the case. Is that within this particular development, there are 21 2-beds. That's 37.5% in effect. So that's within the range that the council's got within its table that sits above the policy.
There is within the affordable mix 5 2-beds and 4 3-beds. So we're quite comfortable on the mix with respect to the affordable housing. And that under paragraph 79, there's a reference to a reasonable contribution from SIL. Just for the members' attention, that amount based upon this floor space is £321,132. Again, just another little bit of a tidy up point. This land formed part of that previous consent for 299 dwellings. So in effect, it was sat within the red line boundary, and it was the 106 that sought to reserve this land for a school, should the council wish to take it up within a particular time period, which they didn't. And just on that point is that we've also now just looked into the birth rates for 2022. The report makes reference at paragraph 41 to falling birth rates, which has been the case now in Leeds for some time. It refers to 2020, but the 2022 results also show that the birth rates continue to fall across the district. And as a result of the remitted SAP sites, the 36 sites that the allocations that are not going ahead, as a result of that, there are now within this sub-area 1,137 dwellings less than the SAP originally expected, and also 284 pupils that have not made it as a result of those new buildings taking place. So the point that's being made and accepted by the Education Department is that this land is not required for a school now. And if you take the 2022 birth rates and project them forward over the next 5 years, it's not going to be required even then, because the children are just not being born at the rates. And what we're not there to do is hollow out the existing capacity within the existing schools. So then that brings us on to alternative uses. For those that have been to see the site, I think those that have been to see the site would recognise that this is clearly a residential area. It's not a site that's suitable for employment uses, perhaps, and it's certainly not a site that's ideally located for retail use. The site is currently owned and will be continue to be owned by Barrett David Wilson Homes. It makes a very logical housing site. It's not part of the management company area. So the concern from the house builder is that if they don't move on to this area now, and that they move away from it once the 299 dwellings are built, with the prospect of coming back at a later date, it's a missed opportunity to take on board those houses now. It's also a missed opportunity to take the existing workforce that is currently on the site, and this is a natural progression for that workforce in what is probably a relatively difficult housing market currently. So we see it as a job extension exercise as much as a community benefit. What I would say about the benefits is that there is affordable housing, there is family housing, there is Section 106 benefits, and there is a considerable SIL contribution. And that SIL contribution at £321,000 can be put to bettering some of the community facilities in this area. So I think overall, it's a good package. With respect to design, we're quite pleased with the design. We've been through 3 design iterations with officers over the last 10 months. And therefore, what we think we're looking at now is a very good design. And I think the images that you've seen on the screen from those photo montages actually demonstrate that. So overall, we're here to answer questions if there are any, but we actually support the officer recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any questions for speakers? From members at all? No? Okay, in which case, do members have any questions for officers? Councillor Finnegan.
In total, with the new stuff and the old stuff, that's 355 houses. How are they served in terms of the spine road that leads onto the estate? Because you're talking about a single spine road. That's supposed to be a maximum of 199 according to the design guides, all the rest of it at this point. How many roads serve these 355 houses at this particular point? Is it a single, or are they two ways in and out?
I'll have to just double check on the plan, unless, John, you're able to answer that.
It's a single point of access. Doesn't that breach the design guide that suggests no more than 199 dwellings off a single spine road?
Which design guide is that?
The old highways guide used to talk about a single spine road, no more than 199, primarily because of the problems of getting in and out should that spine road be blocked. We had a similar discussion about a site in Cherwell about 5, 6 years ago on the same point.
Right. Manual for street sets out how to access developments. There's no actual limit on the number of dwellings that can be served from a single point of access in manual for streets. The street design guide suggests up to 300 dwellings off a single point of access, but it's a suggestion. In terms of this, the access junction has been tested for capacity in the transport assessment, and that demonstrates that there's a spare capacity at the junction.
Any other questions for officers? Councillor Ray?
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, the context of this is obviously the non-viability of a primary school on this site in terms of current birth rates. Do we know what the projected under allocation towards the current primary schools are in the area? Because obviously, I'm sure anyone who's a school governor here knows that probably most of our schools across the city at the moment are reducing their PANs. Do we know what the under occupancy of the current capacity within the local catchment areas are?
So I've got a statement from our children's officers. So the decline in the birth rate, the births across the whole of Ardsley and Tingsley areas have dropped from 212 to 166. So that's 22% in 5 years from 2018 to 2023. And the vacancy levels and surplus places in the schools that currently impact on budget. So there are currently a combined total of 32 vacancies across reception to year 6. With the 5 primary schools across the area. And this also follows a reduction in the published admission number at Blackgates Primary School, who have reduced their places from 60 per year to 30 per year due to the level of surplus places at the school. And the 56 houses would yield approximately 2 children per year group, 14 in total, which can currently be absorbed in the local schools. I think. Yeah, and there's also the impact on existing schools and their financial points. If this site was to be constructed, it would then impact the other schools' viability.
So the long and short from our education team is there's plenty of spare capacity. It's not going to change anytime soon. And actually, if we just reserve the site for a primary school, if someone did come to it, that primary school would probably not be financially viable, let alone the impact on the other primary schools in the area. Would that be the long and short of it?
Yeah, that's correct.
Any other questions, Councillor Smith?
Thanks, Chair. Just so I've got it straight in my head. So this is 56 in addition to the 299 homes that are already approved in the SAP. Yes?
Yeah, that's correct.
Thank you. And my second question is about the primary school. So I understand that the pupil numbers are reducing at the moment. Have we taken into account the pupils that potentially yielded, for want of a better word, through this 299 and this 56 if we're minded to approve today? Thank you.
Yeah, so that's the houses that are already there, that's taking that into account as well.
Any final questions from members? No, in which case we will move on to member comments. Councillor Ray?
Taking into consideration Councillor Foster's passionate plea, which sounds like he's about to cross the floor shortly, but in terms of the actual planning policy, I think let's be absolutely clear. It's not this is not viable for a site for a school. Like I say, most of us here on this panel are school governors. We know the pressure on the school system. The question is, and I do take the developers' argument, there's people on site. It's a natural extension of the site. This land is probably realistically not going to be used because even at the 5-year plan, you've then got to actually have birth rates. So we're probably looking at this site being there for probably 10 to 15 years realistically before it's even anywhere in a capacity to be viable for a school. I don't see any reason under our policies to keep with the current intention, and I think we should approve the officer recommendation.
Councillor Taylor?
Agreed with Councillor Ray, and I've seconded that.
Councillor Finnegan then?
Just to add a cautionary tale for colleagues to reflect on. In 2005, Councillor Ledley and me, whatever happened to him, well, he joined the Lib Dems, but leaving that aside, we were saw the light. Not sure about that. Saw the darkness and was attracted to it, possibly. Anyway, getting back to the point, the planning point. At this particular point, we were briefed by the demographic unit at that particular stage about Cherwell Primary School, which was 3-form entry at that particular point. And we were told in 2005, Councillor, the birthright is dropped. We're in a situation where you're never going to have that particular demand. We will reduce it from a 3-form entry to a 2-form entry. And that subsequently is what happened at that particular point. Roll on a few years, 2010, 2011. We get approached again by the demographic unit that basically says you haven't got enough capacity for primary schools in your particular area. So we're going to have to expand, and we can no longer go back to Asquith. We can no longer go back to Cherwell Primary at this particular point. We would need to make Asquith Primary, which was a 1-form entry, into a 2-form entry. And that's subsequently what happened at that particular location. So I would take... My experience tells me that taking a view from the demographic unit and children's services that there's never going to be a problem, there's not going to be a problem in 5 years' time, is short-sighted. And at this stage, I think we ought to resist rushing into sticking more houses. There is an interesting discussion and debate about the demographic situation we find ourselves in, what we're going to do about caring staff and NHS staff, what we're going to do in terms of levels of immigration that will need to support that changing demographic. I think it is foolish and unwise at this particular point to basically wave a white flag and hand this over to housing development, because I suspect in another 5 years' time, like me and Councillor Ledley, at that particular point, we will be told, well, we got that one wrong. We now need to find a new site for a school. So I won't be supporting this recommendation. That basis, I've had a quick look at the street guide that says 200, not 199. And I also don't think running 350 houses off a single spine road where you're going to get all sorts of problems in terms of vehicles getting in and out, should that spine road be disruptive, is another reason to refuse this.
Steve would just like to come in and clarify, and then I will go to Councillor Campbell.
Sorry, just very briefly on the highways thing. I remember that debate at Cherwell, Councillor Finnegan, but the information that's been put forward relates to the Highways and Transport SPD, which was approved in February 23. So obviously the guidance referring to the 300 capacity is significantly after the discussion that we had at Cherwell several years ago.
Okay, Councillor Campbell, and apologies for skipping you before.
No problem. I'm fascinated that my good friend Councillor Finnegan here has some inside information about there'll be a sudden boost in the birth rate in Ardsley in 5 years' time.
And a point materially contributing to that on a personal level.
Right. Okay.
That's probably reassuring.
Yeah, maybe so. Notwithstanding that, I think we're facing a difficult situation, and I'll go back to the SAP because during the SAP period, when the discussions first started, we were faced with a rising birth rate. I have to be honest with you, across much of the city, and that was one of the reasons why the development plans panel were insistent that we identify potential school sites. And I think that was a good idea at the time, actually. But it does seem clear to me from the ward I represent and Guiseley and all the rest of it, that in most of the city, the birth rate's falling away. And the demographic unit for the unit for the education department will say to you, and I agree with them, predicting birth rates is a bit of an inexact science, quite frankly. You can only go actually on how many children were born, not how many might be born. So I think we have to accept that there's an evidence base which seems to be in place to say that the designation of a school on this site is no longer appropriate. And it would seem to me that if we went to an appeal and the inspector asks for evidence, the only evidence we can show an inspector is that the birth rate's falling and actually there isn't the demand. So you then say to yourself, what happens to the site? Now, in effect, the SAP identified it as a potential site for development. Okay. And the only other real alternative is for a housing development. So it seems to me that the principle of amending, I suppose, our policy to include housing at this location is actually effectively within the system anyway. This is the point where I use the phrase "but." I have to say, I looked at the site and I looked at the layout design that you gave us a copy of, and it came up on the screen. And I have to say, it's pretty uninspiring. You know, let's be really honest about this. Can you put the picture of the layout back up? Right, that'll do nicely. I mean, you look at the bit that's already been green spaced, and it's like a vast open prairie, ideal for the dog walker. But, you know, even on that drawing, there's very few trees. I look at this site, and in effect, with the best will in the world to Barratt and their designers, we've just dropped the Barratt estate straight into that location. Now, they've stuck a piece of green space next to the entrance, the Spire Road entrance, basically because there's not much else you can do with it. And it seems to me that this is a completely missed opportunity to develop something, a design and a layout that would complement East Ardsley. I mean, they have had some unfortunate developments, but it's a nice little bits of it are quite a nice little village. And I think you could, by actually looking a bit closer at the street design guide, create a development on that site, which would actually be a complementary development to East Ardsley and would actually be a nice development. This is just a street with houses off. It's not what we expect, in my opinion, these days for a development. The green space is token green space, in my opinion. You're not actually doing anything with it. You've just got that space there. Let's stick 3 trees on and hope for the best. We've got a garden at the back, park at the front. This really is not a development of the quality I would expect us to be asking for. As I've said, I think the principle I could accept. What they're proposing is, in my opinion, not acceptable.
Councillor Smith?
Thank you. I'm struggling with this one, I've got to be honest. The community has accepted, or had to accept 299 new homes. This is again an addition. It doesn't seem to be particularly well thought out addition. The space, I accept we probably don't need a primary school there given the figures as things stand. But as has been pointed out, we don't know what's going to happen in 3, 5, 7 years time. This is a very large amount of houses. There will be new families, there will be comings and goings, people moving into the area, people having babies and things like that. I think we should hang on before we make a decision. Should we make a decision to put it back into housing? I'm not sure that's the right thing. Given the number of new homes, is it better to have some sort of communal use, as Councillor Foster has requested. I mean, I don't know the ins and the outs of that, and I know that we can't design by committee. But I just wonder if we're missing a trick by rushing in to building on this at this stage. I wonder whether we should wait and see how things develop, and ask the developer to come back. It'll take him time to build out what he's building on now. So, you know, the teams won't have left site. And I know these things take time to arrange, but I do think that we should defer at this stage and basically wait and see what happens. I think they should bring it back to us. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Smith. I've got Councillor Ray, who's indicated as my final indication. Does anyone else after Councillor Ray want to make any final comments? Okay.
Yeah, just to reflect on my original proposed motion after what Councillor Campbell has said, I actually probably think we can look at a better utilisation of the green space and design. So I would like to amend my motion to defer and delegate to officers after having discussion with the applicant around the design and the works around the development. I don't think it's something that necessarily needs to come back here, but I think there is probably a fair discussion to have around actually the design of the site and trying to make that more complementary to the area.
Okay, I'm just going to bring in Steve on that.
Sorry, Chair, I thought we were moving to an extant motion there for a moment, but it was taken away, snatched away. I think there's a little bit too much in terms of the delegation, though, although I've been generally happy to take that, but members need to be specific, I think, if we are to do that. And I think it's more likely to be just a simple defer to properly explore what you really want in terms of what is it that's not correct with the scheme. Because officers obviously thought it was an acceptable scheme in terms of its design and layout, bearing in mind the constraints of the site. So I think you need to be more specific as to what it is that you really want, in which case you might be wanting to consider deferral. But can I just add something else whilst I've got the mic? Sorry, briefly. I was noticed when I was looking at the recommendation, there is actually a line missing. So wherever we go with this, I'd just like to make members aware that in the first paragraph of the actual report, it makes it clear that it's a departure from the development plan. Therefore, it would need to be reported to the Secretary of State. So it should have an extra line in there that says defer and delegate subject to and the departure. But I'll leave it to you to whatever you want to say about the layout. And
that being the case, then can I suggest an amendment to my amendment, as it were, that we delegate specifically on the grounds of looking not at the principle of development on this site, which I think most of us have said relatively we're comfortable with, not all of us, but that we look at specifically how we can improve the utility of the public green space around the site and its biodiversity, and specifically defer on that, not necessarily the principle of the development, because I think I'm comfortable with the principle of the development.
Councillor Campbell, I think, wanted to add something to that.
Yes, Chair. I think what I was going to say initially was I think what we've said basically that we need to be specific because we can't just simply send officers away. Also, we need to be specific for developers so they understand what we're saying. So I would agree with the comment in relation to the green space, which is token in many ways. It seems to me, looking at the artist's impressions of the street scene, we could do much more in relation to segregating cars and pedestrian stroke cyclists. We could do much more, I think, on the street scene in relation to planting, particularly trees, but actually green space within the development to try and make a development that it's a residential development, but it isn't dominated by the car as this one would be. And I will put in my bid, you might not be able to get them to do this, but I often say we should try and design into the road layout a mechanism to prevent motorists putting their car on the grass verge or the road or the pavement. And that can be something as simple as a very high curb or something else like a tree. But certainly the street design guide works on the principle that you won't park on the pavement, but unfortunately motorists seem to find a way around that. But we can design that out. So that would be my other comment in relation to your suggestion.
Okay, a couple of other councillors have indicated, but before I jump into you guys' comments, I'm just going to bring officers in beforehand.
If we could just get the layout plan up again. Thank you. And it's just to show members that where it says LEAP in the corner up there. So that is like a large playground. So that will be part of the development scheme. It says subject to detailing. And also in this area to the front around there, that will also be like a smaller playground. So we do have some areas of play in the green space. It's not just open fields there. And then we've also got the green space to the front, obviously, that separates the two developments.
With the best will in the world, Chair, the red line goes around the green space for the other housing development as well. And we're talking about this particular element of the housing development. And notwithstanding that there's going to be a play park as part of the other one, I think actually we want something better in the way of landscaping. This is poor landscaping. I'm sorry. It's not doing anything for biodiversity.
Yeah, sorry, just to clarify, the LEAP is part of the other development, but obviously it will be in use with this development as well. So it was provided under the other application, but it will be available there for this development as well to use.
Okay, I've got Councillor Gavani.
Thanks, Chair. Tend to agree with all the comments about the layout. There seems to be a load of green space that is purely that. There's a lot of opportunity for tree planting there. So can we look at that? And with the single access road, there's a good example of the problems that causes in my own ward with the Horsforth Vale estate. There's one way in. Yes, there are two ways out, but there's only one way in. If that road is blocked, and it does happen 3-4 times a year, then people can't get home. So I think they do need to look at having 2 ways in, 2 ways out. And if that can be added on to what they discuss with the developers, that'd be much appreciated.
Chair, sorry, Chair has just asked me a question and just to answer it, probably is going a bit too far that, because we've already had advice from our highways officer that actually it is compliant with us guidance in terms of the access in and out. And that goes way beyond what I'd expect as a delegation to officers, because that would be a complete redesign of the estate. So I'm not sure that's appropriate this time. But what I would just say, now that I've got a little bit more clarity in terms of an alternative motion that is to defer and delegate to officers, including the referral. I think we've got clarity, and in effect, we want more landscaping within the various play areas and green space, but and also segregation of car and pedestrian movements, more trees to avoid the verges. So I think that could be a deferral, because I think we're quite clear on what we could achieve there. We've done that before. If members were happy to run with that.
Are you happy to amend your amended motion on the basis? Yes, just because you can only vote on one motion per time as a panel.
I'm happy to amend to propose that the amendment of my amendment of the amendment. Yes, basically.
As per the comments that Steve Butler has just made. Can the seconder please confirm that the seconder to the original motion, because this is an amended motion, and that was Councillor Taylor. Yes.
I do still have one further comment from Finnegan. Councillor Finnegan.
I've been called much worse, Chair, so not really a problem. If we are going to defer at this particular point, can we have a bit more meat on the bones of a single spine road, which is only supposed to serve up to 300 and is serving 355? And I'd like to see more clarity on the justification for that, because it's breaching our own guidance on that one. And as a plea that you've heard before, can we have the figures for EN1? Because I do note in terms of generating their own electricity, they're not suggesting solar panels for all of these roofs, just some of them. So I want to know and understand via the figures how they're going to reach their obligations in terms of generation from renewable sources when not every roof is going to have a solar panel on it. If that's the case, then if we defer for extra clarity, then I'm happy to support for the second time today, my learned colleague over there.
Okay, in relation to the two access points, granted, absolutely accept what Steve said about it not being appropriate for here, but I wonder if it would be something that I, as chair, can bring up in the avenues that we have as panel chairs, just so that members are aware that that will be something that we can look at.
Sorry, members. You've snatched it away from me again. Because of the reference that Councillor Finnegan's made, and if it's supported by a panel about the solar panels and the renewables, but also about the further information and justifying the single access road, I think what we would need here is actually for this to be deferred for us to come back with the 4 points now, which is one about the landscape, additional landscaping, improving the biodiversity, car segregation and pedestrian segregation. But then, of course, I think we need to talk to the applicant about the solar panels and the spine road, particularly to justify that to members, because that is information that you couldn't really rely upon. Officers, not rely. That's the wrong word. We couldn't take the responsibility for that. We need to bring that back to yourself. So it would be a deferring delegate on those specific 4 points. I think I would suggest to members if sorry, defer. Sorry, yeah. If that's okay.
Very quickly, Councillor Smith.
It was extremely quickly, just as part of the biodiversity upgrade and the reference to the green space. Going back to the community feel, could we have some kind of community orchard / grow your own / section? There's lots of green space there. And it would be a lovely thing for the community to come together if we could work that into that green space. Thank you.
I'm slightly confused as to what's being proposed and what's been amended. We've had an amendment for a defer and delegate with a host of reasons in relation to the points that Steve mentioned. It seems to have moved on slightly now to a total deferral and return the matter for those additional points, especially in relation to EN1, to be returned to panel. Now, given that this is an amended motion that Councillor Ray has put forward and has been seconded, would you accept that as a full amendment or not?
No, because I think we're becoming over prescriptive. We're deviating from what our major concern was around the green space, and I've seen no indication from officers that they have any concerns over EN1, etc. in their proposal. So at this moment, I'd like us to go to a vote on my amended motion.
Sorry, Chair. I'm getting complicated, isn't it? Okay with this, Nikki. Jump in if you wish when I've finished. But so we're going back to the motion, which is specifically about improving the green space in terms of additional planting and potential biodiversity by virtue of the additional planting and the segregation of pedestrian and vehicular traffic. Now, that could be delegated to officers. So that would be a motion that members might, because it moved and seconded, but not accepting the other points which refer to the additional solar panels, etc., and the highways issue. So it's purely on those original 2 points related to the green space, which will be deferred and delegated, and we'd run it past the chair as well, just for surety. Is that okay?
No, Councillor Fresh, to clarify.
Sorry, Chair, can I just say, I'm minded of what Steve Varley said to us about 3 city plans ago, about being very clear to developers exactly what we want them to do. And if we want officers to go away and negotiate, for them to be able to come back to us and say, we said this, we said this, we said this, they've come back to us and said, no, we're not doing it. And that's, I think, a decision we need to make. So it may well be that if, I'm not saying they will for a minute, but if they come back to us and say, no, we're not planting any more trees, then I think we need to be able to say, well, that's not acceptable. I'm not saying they won't, they will. That's not an issue. So it seems to me that if we're deferring it, we need it to come back in its amended form. In its amended form. And it may well be that we just nod it through. That'll be the day, but that'll, we may just nod it through because actually they've done as much as they can. And if they can't do something, we have a rationale for them not doing it. And I think EM1, just if you drop Councillor Finnegan a note which tells him what the EN1 figures are, that's effectively what we need, isn't it?
Councillor Campbell, can I just clarify, is that a competing motion to what's on the table already? And Councillor Campbell must clarify and confirm if he is putting forward a competing motion. Well,
I think I was simply trying to
or persuade, or
I was simply trying to tease out whether Councillor Ray's proposal, which I think we're more or less okay with, it will produce something that comes back to us, or is simply delegated to officers.
Yeah,
and if you're saying to me it can come back to us, then that.
Just to clarify, I think my motion was to defer and delegate to officers with consultation of the chair, and I think I have confidence in the chair's ability to make sure that our wishes are heard to officers is more than sufficient, because we're not talking about the totality of the scheme. We're talking about the very specific things we've mentioned. And I think actually bringing it therefore back to panel actually doesn't actually utilise panel's time in the best possible way, when I've got faith in the chair and the officers to take away our particular points and deal with them.
Sorry, I always say I'm not going to get involved at panel. Just to make this clear for members, because it is getting very confusing, because Councillor Campbell has made a secondary motion as such.
Actually, I don't think Councillor Campbell has made a secondary motion. I think he was just fishing for trying to get information. Yeah. If to move this thing along, like you, I have confidence in the chair, and I'm sure that the chair would, if it comes back and the chair feels that our request has not been met in an appropriate manner, he would bring it back to us, and we would express a view, and I have every confidence.
So what is the
so I've not actually proposed an amendment to an amendment to an amendment to an amendment to an amendment. I just simply was seeking information. Sorry. Does that help you out, Steve?
Sorry, the only reason I made reference to a potential secondary motion is simply because Councillor Ray's original motion doesn't go as far as what's been suggested by yourself, Councillor Campbell, Councillor Smith and Councillor Finnegan. And that was on the table. So if that is not a motion, and we've not included those because Councillor Ray's original motion did not, it was specific about the landscaping and the segregation, that's what we will be voting on at this particular point.
Yes. Okay.
Why don't you tell us what you think we're going to vote on? Well, no, it's important that officers tell us, because actually this is what they should have written down.
Well, it's as simple as this, and this is why I talked about the secondary motion, but which you say it is not. My feeling is that what has been suggested by yourself and Councillor Smith is not actually being agreed with by the whole panel, and it's not being made as a motion.
No, with respect, Steve, what I'm saying to you is, what do you think? Councillor Ray has got a proposal that we think we understand. We might understand.
It's not.
Would you say to us what you think, or what note you've got written down, which actually says what that resolution is, and that will make it clear in everybody's mind which bit's right and which bit's wrong.
Well, if we haven't got another motion, actually, we can have Steve read out what he has written down, and then we've already got a proposer in a second, and I will then move it to the vote. Okay.
So going back again, it's defer and delegate to the Chief Planning Officer approval subject to specified conditions and amendment, etc. And referral to the Secretary of State, plus improvements via the additional planting in the green space area to improve biodiversity and to secure car and pedestrian segregations and the avoidance of vehicles parking on verges.
And amenity, not just biodiversity.
Yeah.
Amenity, wasn't it?
And sorry, and,
Yeah, yeah.
and of course the Chair's agreement, yeah.
All those in favour?
6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
And anyone against? And there's nobody left to abstain. So that has passed. Thank you.
Do I need to?
Guys, focus.
Are we comfortable with the explanation I gave before? Do I need to reiterate it?
So-
No, you've had enough. Okay.
Right, folks, if we're not careful, I'll have to use my teacher voice again. Agenda item number 9 is the date and time of the next meeting, which is proposed as Thursday, the 8th of February at 1:30 p.m. And that concludes our business in today's meeting. Thank you for your attendance and contributions. And I now declare the meeting closed. Thank you.